November 17, 1962, Washington, D.C. The air was crisp that morning as Ian Thomas adjusted his tie in the reflection of a closed storefront window. 3 years at his State Department desk job had taught him the importance of appearances. His gray wool overcoat, perfectly appropriate for a mid-level Foreign Service officer, blended seamlessly with the sea of government workers flowing toward federal buildings across the city. 7 days after Kennedy's televised address about Soviet missiles in Cuba, the Capitol still hummed with tension. Ian had watched colleagues stockpile canned goods and build fallout shelters. He'd nodded sympathetically during lunch breaks as they discussed evacuation plans. But Ian harbored no such fears. He possessed information others didn't. At precisely 8:47 a.m., Ian entered the small corner newsstand 2 blocks from the State Department. He purchased the Washington Post, exchanging practice pleasantries with the aging proprietor, before continuing his commute. No one noticed his left hand briefly touch the underside of the 3rd shelf, a momentary contact leaving behind a microfilm smaller than a dime. 3 miles away, Hannah Osborne sat at her desk in the CIA's counterintelligence division, reviewing surveillance photographs. At 32, she had risen quickly through the ranks, helped by her exceptional memory and an almost preternatural ability to spot patterns others missed. A woman in intelligence faced unique challenges, but Hannah had learned to use others' underestimation to her advantage. "Osborne, you're needed in Wilkinson's office," called a colleague. Hannah found her supervisor pacing behind his desk, cigarette smoke forming a hazy cloud above his balding head. "We intercepted something," he said without preamble, sliding a folder across his desk. "Radio transmission, one-time pad encryption. The Soviets are getting careless." Hannah opened the folder. Inside was a decoded message. "Songbird confirms Jupiter withdrawal from Turkey, part of Cuba resolution. Formal announcement delayed. Collection continues." "Someone at State," Wilkinson continued, lighting another cigarette. "High enough to access the negotiation details, but not in the inner circle. We've been trying to identify their agent for months." Hannah stared at the message. "This is recent?" "Last night. Their communications increased after Cuba. We've been monitoring 4 potential assets, but haven't been able to connect any to Soviet handlers." "I want the surveillance files on all 4, Hannah said. "Already on your desk. The director wants daily updates." After Cuba, Kennedy's taking counterintelligence seriously. The weight of the assignment wasn't lost on Hannah. Finding a Soviet agent in the State Department would make her career. Failing might end it. For 6 weeks, Hannah lived and breathed the investigation. Her small apartment filled with notes and photographs as she tracked the suspect's movements, phone calls, and contacts. For men, all with access to classified information on the Jupiter missiles. Ian Thomas, William Harrison, James Fulbright, and Robert Moore. On a cold December evening, Hannah sat cross-legged on her living room floor, surrounded by surveillance reports. Something about Thomas nagged at her. His routine was impeccable, too impeccable. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he left his Georgetown apartment at 6:30 a.m. for a jog. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, he visited the same newsstand before work. She pulled the newsstand surveillance photos, examining each with a magnifying glass. Nothing unusual until she noticed a pattern. In 3 separate photos, spanning weeks apart, Thomas's hand briefly disappeared beneath a shelf while purchasing his newspaper. "The newsstand," she whispered. The next morning, Hannah arrived at the office before dawn. By 7:30 a.m., she'd convinced Wilkinson to authorize an immediate search of the newsstand. "You better be right, Osborne," he warned. "If we spook a Soviet operation without evidence, the director will have both our badges." At 8:30 a.m., a team disguised as health inspectors entered the newsstand. By 9:15, they had found 3 separate dead drop locations, each hollowed out beneath shelving. The proprietor, they determined, was entirely innocent, the ideal unwitting host. "Now we wait," Hannah told Wilkinson. "If Thomas is our man, he'll make contact soon." They must be nervous after missing yesterday's drop. 3 days passed without activity. On the 4th day, surveillance reported Thomas taking an unusual route home, walking through Rock Creek Park instead of taking his usual bus. Hannah immediately dispatched a team. In the park, Thomas made contact with a man later identified as Nikolai Petrov, listed officially as a cultural attaché at the Soviet embassy. The brief exchange in a secluded area of the park was photographed from multiple angles. What appeared to be an innocent passing of strangers was, to trained eyes, a textbook brush pass. "We've got him," Wilkinson said, examining the photographs. "But we need more than a suspicious meeting. We need proof of espionage." January 11th, 1963, was unseasonably warm. Ian Thomas felt a bead of sweat form at his temple as he waited for the bus. Something felt wrong. The newsstand had been his primary dead drop for 18 months, but his handler had suddenly changed protocols, requesting the park meeting 3 days ago. "Changes concern me," his KGB training officer had once told him. "When established patterns break, suspect compromise." Ian boarded the bus, casually scanning for surveillance. Nothing obvious, but the hair on the back of his neck prickled. At his stop, he deliberately missed getting off, remaining seated for another 3 blocks before finally exiting. He walked 2 blocks east, then doubled back west, entering a department store and exiting through a different door. No one seemed to be following, yet the uneasiness persisted. That evening, Ian received a phone call. "The exhibition at the National Gallery is quite impressive," said the female voice, "particularly the Dutch masters. You should visit before it closes this Sunday." The code phrase activated emergency protocols. Something had gone wrong. Ian hung up without responding and immediately moved to his contingency plan. From beneath his kitchen sink, he retrieved a hollowed-out can of cleaning product containing $5,000 in cash, a passport in another name, and a small key to a bus station locker. Within 20 minutes, his apartment was clean of anything incriminating, and he was walking toward the bus terminal. "He's running," Hannah reported, bursting into Wilkinson's office. "Our surveillance team observed Thomas retrieving emergency supplies and heading toward the Greyhound station. He must have been tipped off." "Damn it!" Wilkinson slammed his fist on the desk. "How?" "Unknown, but we need to move now. If he reaches his handler, pick him up, quietly." 30 minutes later, Hannah watched from an unmarked car as 3 agents intercepted Thomas at the bus terminal. The arrest was swift and discreet. A hand on his shoulder, a badge flashed, and Thomas was escorted to a waiting vehicle. His face, Hannah noted, betrayed no surprise, only resignation. The interrogation room at the FBI field office was deliberately stark. Gray walls, metal table, uncomfortable chairs. Hannah observed through one-way glass as Thomas sat motionless, eyes fixed on the table before him. He had said nothing since his arrest, not even requesting an attorney. "He's trained," noted the FBI agent beside her. "KGB preparation for interrogation resistance." After 3 hours, Hannah entered the room. She placed a folder on the table and sat across from Thomas. "Mr. Thomas," she began, "we know about the newsstand. We have photographs of your meeting with Petrov. We've searched your apartment and found the shortwave radio hidden in your record player." Thomas remained impassive. Hannah opened the folder and slid a photograph across the table. It showed Thomas passing something to Petrov in the park. "What interested us most," Hannah continued, "wasn't what we found, but what we didn't find. No code books, no encryption materials. For someone passing classified information, you were surprisingly clean." A flicker of something, relief, crossed Thomas's face. That made us curious, so we decided to send a message of our own. Hannah produced another document. This is a transcript of a radio transmission sent 3 days ago on a frequency we know the KGB monitors. A simple message about Jupiter missiles, but with a particular phrase, formal announcement delayed, that appeared in only one classified memo, a memo that crossed your desk last month. Thomas's composure slipped momentarily. We sent the message, then watched to see who would act on it. The newsstand was suddenly abandoned. Emergency protocols activated. And you, Mr. Thomas, began running. Thomas's eyes widened as understanding dawned. You weren't compromised by surveillance or an informant, Hannah explained. You were exposed by your own reaction to information that only you could have provided. We created the message, sent it ourselves, and waited to see who would recognize their own intelligence coming back to them. The silence stretched between them. Why? Hannah finally asked. You had a promising career, access to a comfortable life. What did they offer you? Thomas looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time. They didn't have to offer anything, he said quietly. I volunteered. Ideology. Hannah pressed. Thomas gave a bitter laugh. I watched McCarthy destroy lives based on rumor and innuendo. I saw our government topple democratically elected leaders and call it freedom. The hypocrisy became unbearable. So you betrayed your country. I chose a side in a war neither country should be fighting, Thomas countered. Do you really believe we're the heroes in this story, Miss Osborne? Hannah gathered her documents. That's for history to decide, Mr. Thomas. But for now, you're facing charges under the Espionage Act. I suggest you consider cooperation. The Soviets have already disavowed any connection to you. As she stood to leave, Thomas spoke again. We almost destroyed the world over Cuba. Did you know that? Closer than anyone realized. If someone hadn't been passing information between Moscow and Washington, unofficial channels keeping both sides informed. Hannah paused at the door. Are you suggesting your espionage was some form of peacekeeping? Thomas simply shrugged. The missiles are leaving Cuba. The Jupiters will leave Turkey. Neither side loses face. Sometimes the truth is what prevents catastrophe. June 17, 1975, Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary. Hannah Osborne signed the visitor log and followed the guard through a series of security doors. 12 years had passed since the Thomas case had made her career. Now a deputy director at the CIA, her visit was officially classified as a routine intelligence follow-up. Ian Thomas had aged. His once dark hair had turned gray, his face lined from years of imprisonment. He seemed unsurprised to see her. Miss Osborne, he greeted her with a small nod. Or should I say deputy director now? Congratulations. Thank you for agreeing to meet, Hannah said, taking the seat across from him. 12 years in prison offers limited social opportunities, Thomas replied with a faint smile. What brings the CIA to my humble abode? Hannah placed a file on the table. Détente is changing things. There's talk of a potential prisoner exchange. Your name has come up. Hope flickered in Thomas's eyes before disappearing behind practiced neutrality. Why would they want me? I'm hardly a high-value asset. On the contrary, the Soviets consider you quite valuable, particularly after documents emerged suggesting your information may have helped de-escalate tensions during Cuba. Thomas's expression remained carefully controlled. Was that your real mission all along? Hannah asked. Not just collecting intelligence, but passing information both ways? Acting as an unofficial back channel. Would it matter if it was? Thomas asked. Espionage is espionage, regardless of intent. Hannah studied him. Intent always matters. It's the difference between 15 years and a life sentence. They sat in silence for a moment. The exchange would send you to Moscow, Hannah finally said. You'd never return to the United States. Thomas looked around the visiting room. Is that supposed to be a deterrent? I'm offering you a choice. Cooperate with a full debrief, everything you know about Soviet operations, their recruitment methods, their networks, and I can recommend commutation instead. You could stay here, build a life after prison. Thomas considered her offer. And if Moscow is my preference? Hannah collected her file. Then, in approximately 6 months, you'll be on a plane to Berlin for the exchange. Either way, your time here is coming to an end. As she stood to leave, Thomas spoke again. The message that caught me, the one you created. How did you know it would work? Hannah paused. The best traps aren't elaborate. They're simple, playing on basic human psychology. When people see their own secrets reflected back at them, they react instinctively. You thought your cover was blown because the information could only have come from you. Elegant, Thomas acknowledged. I underestimated you. Most men do, Hannah replied. October 12, 1990, Moscow. The Berlin Wall had fallen, and the Soviet Union was crumbling. In a small apartment near Gorky Park, Ian Thomas, now known as Mikhail Rodionov, watched the news with a mixture of disbelief and resignation. The knock at his door was unexpected. Few people visited anymore. Most of his KGB contacts had disappeared into the chaos of a collapsing system. He opened the door to find Hannah Osborne. May I come in? She asked in perfect Russian. Thomas stepped aside wordlessly. Nice place, Hannah commented, glancing around the modest apartment. Better than Lewisburg, I imagine. Why are you here? Thomas asked, switching to English. Officially, I'm part of a diplomatic delegation, Hannah explained, taking a seat without invitation. Unofficially, I'm tying up loose ends before retirement. Thomas poured 2 glasses of vodka, handing one to Hannah. And I'm a loose end? You're a puzzle I never fully solved, she admitted. You chose Moscow over freedom in 1975. I've always wondered why. Thomas gestured around his apartment. Perhaps I believed in something. And now, with your cause collapsing around you, Thomas smiled thinly. Causes come and go, but some choices can't be undone. Hannah sipped her vodka. There's still time. The world is changing. America might welcome a Cold War defector with valuable historical insight. Is that why you're really here? To recruit me again after all these years. Hannah reached into her coat and produced an envelope. This was recently declassified. I thought you might find it interesting. Thomas opened the envelope. Inside was a CIA analysis dated October 1962, detailing backchannel communications that had helped defuse the Cuban Missile Crisis. Your unofficial diplomacy didn't go entirely unnoticed, Hannah said quietly. Some in the State Department suspected you were playing both sides. They just couldn't prove it without exposing their own unofficial channels. Thomas stared at the document, his hands trembling slightly. History is being rewritten as we speak, Hannah continued. The narrative of heroes and villains is giving way to something more complex. Your story could be part of that reassessment. Too late for redemption, Thomas murmured. Not redemption. Understanding. Hannah finished her drink and stood. My card is in the envelope. If you ever want to tell your full story, call me. At the door, she turned back. Did you ever regret it? Getting caught? Thomas considered the question. I regret the necessity of it all. The lies, the fear, the lives damaged by a conflict that ultimately proved meaningless. But someone had to stand in the gap, even if history never knows their names. Hannah nodded. For what it's worth, I believe you thought you were doing the right thing. After she left, Thomas returned to the window, watching snowflakes begin to fall on a Moscow that would soon belong to a country that didn't yet exist. The boundaries between heroes and traitors, he reflected, were as impermanent as the borders being redrawn across Europe. He picked up Hannah's card, turning it over in his fingers. Perhaps some stories deserve to be told, not for redemption, but for the truth they revealed about the human cost of secrets. About how a single message, reflecting one's own betrayal, could expose a life lived in plain sight, and the complex loyalties that no intelligence file could ever fully capture.